Please read Revelation chapter 17. Now, the Middle East is the backdrop of most of the events John sees in the last days. The seven churches that Jesus addresses are in Turkey. The city of Jerusalem is where the witnesses prophesy. The 144,000 Jews are with Jesus on Mount Zion. It's where the final battle of Armageddon is held, near the mountain in Israel called Megiddo. The fallen angels who were bound are released from the great river Euphrates, which flows through Syria and Iraq. By the way, did you know that the Euphrates River is drying up? The news reports as early as 2015 show that this river is abating at an alarming rate. Did you also remember that John sees this river drying up when the sixth bowl of judgment is poured out? We just covered that in chapter 16. So as I continue to understand Revelation as it relates to the last days, I have to constantly steer myself away from my American mindset and focus on the Middle East and what Jesus would have been showing and telling John. With that being said, let me continue. What John is shown next gives further evidence for my hypothesis that most of the second half of Revelation is the retelling of specific events that actually took place in the first half. One of the angels who poured out the plagues comes over to John to talk, and he basically says, "If you come with me, I will show you what is going to happen to the notorious prostitute who sits upon the many waters of the world." John is whisked away into the wilderness and shown a most horrifying creature, a woman who is dressed in red and purple. She's got on lots of expensive, flashy jewelry. She's foul-mouthed. She's drinking a goblet of obscenities. She's got blood coming out of the corners of her mouth, and she's drunk. John says that she was drunk with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. John just stands there in horror at the gaudy, awful creature. This notorious prostitute is referred to as Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and idol worship everywhere around the world. Who is Babylon, and why is her judgment so severe that almost 3 chapters are devoted to her destruction? While I have no intention of delving into a comprehensive history of ancient Babylon, I do want to concentrate on what makes her such an enemy of God. Most scholars believe the reference to Babylon in Revelation is not the literal city that exists today. And I'm inclined to agree. Modern day Babylon is a city mostly in ruins, about 50 miles south of Baghdad, only a shell of its former days under the multiple rulers. Given enough time, it could very well be as powerful and menacing as it used to be. We've seen that happen before with various other nations. But I personally think that it is not the actual city, but the characteristics of that city, which the angel is referring. Just an ordinary example of this would be the brand name of Kleenex. The Kleenex brand so captured the market with its product that people interchange its name with its product or characteristics. People will ask, "Will you please pass me a Kleenex?" What they really mean is, "Will you please pass me a tissue?" The same is true of Google. Though it's a brand name, it so captured the market on internet searches that we say we're going to Google it instead of search it. Babylon so captured the market on evil in God's eyes that if you were called Babylon, you were being called by its characteristic, evil. So I want to look at the characteristics of ancient Babylon. The original name of Babylon is Babel. If you're not familiar with that name, it is referred to in Genesis 11. Right in the middle of the list of the genealogy of Noah after the flood, there's the story of Noah's great-great-grandson, Nimrod, who was the king of ancient Babylon, or Babel. The story goes like this. The people had one language and one speech according to the Bible. I think this translation is a little vague. Probably a more comprehensive meaning would be that all the people on the earth at this time were thinking and saying the same thing. There was no dissenting opinions. There were no political parties, no minority opposition, just one acceptable social behavior, just one social norm. For those of you like me who have been completely disgusted and vexed in my soul in recent years, after the contentious and mean spirited election process, this sounds like utopia. The only problem is that all this unity and harmony that resulted in everyone getting along was so insidious, was just an insidious act against God. With one goal, they decided that they would build a city with a tower that would reach heaven. They were going to use bricks and dirt, materials God had given them, so that they could make a name for themselves. They didn't want to be known by God's name. They wanted their own name. This was a haughty, arrogant act of rebellion, one that God was very familiar with. Satan destroyed his life and the life of millions of fallen angels that he convinced to follow him with the same ungrateful plan. He said, I will exalt my throne above God's, make a name for myself apart from God. There is no greater act of sin than rebellion. Interestingly, we don't know any of the names of the people who are part of this rebellion. They are nameless and faceless in Scripture. The very thing they were trying to accomplish without God, making a name for themselves, caused them to lose their identity for all eternity. God came down to see the city and tower that the people built. And God said, indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do now. Nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. It was then that God confused their language. The consensus being that this is how and why foreign languages begin. I imagine it happened as quickly as lightning flashes. Everyone started wandering around trying to find another person they could understand and relate to. Perhaps he rewired their thinking or their ability to empathize with each other. Perhaps it is not just their linguistic differences that were altered, but also their intellectual differences as well. In either case, God scattered this people across the earth so that he would not have to once again destroy them. Now, fast forward to the end of the age, approximately 6,000 years. Again, 6 being the number of man. After all God did to preserve the life of these original Babylonians, this is what they become in 6,000 years. A filthy prostitute who performs all types of perversion to gain money and a name for herself, built on murdering every dissenting voice of the people of God. Now, just for the record, I personally know women who have been prostitutes. And this whore of Babylon is so awful that she gives prostitutes a bad name. The angel is described, actually, the angel is surprised that John is surprised with the sight of this prostitute. But he goes on to describe who she is and the beast she's riding. John is not always told the meaning of the images he sees, probably because some of them literally are what they are. But in this chapter, he is given details. John is told that the mystery of Babylon is that she is, in fact, a city, a great city which reigns over all the kings of the world. The great prostitute is riding on a scarlet animal, a familiar one. Guess what it has? 7 heads, 10 horns. The same number of the dragon, Satan, that was in the pageant that John saw, and the same description of the beast in Revelation and in Daniel 7, right down to the blasphemous writings on its head. The angel told Daniel this creature would be the last world power on the earth before Jesus returns. The angel tells John this creature used to be in power before. Its power was crushed, but now it's back, and the people left on earth will be astonished at the return of this world power. So while it could be a collection of people, but when I think about having power and not having power, I think of Russia. They come to mind just because of this verse, because I'm old enough to remember the threat of Russia. Actually, it was called the USSR, Soviet Union, back in the day. When the Soviet Union collapsed, everyone thought the threat from Russia was over. However, Russia is very much alive again and making multiple allies around the world, especially in the Middle East. Now, the 7 heads are 7 kings of history. That was what Daniel was told. The 10 horns are 10 kings the angel said had not come to power yet, at least not as of John's writing. Because of an immediate circumstance, perhaps a second coming event, these 10 kings or 10 nations are given power for a brief time, long enough to sign a treaty with the beast. Of course, treachery and murder is really the goal, as they are being deceived by Satan. They betray the great prostitute. She thinks that they are still working with her, but their hatred for her is deep. She is destroyed in one day, and the merchants of the world mourn her loss. Then the 10 kings wage war against the Lamb, Jesus. This is the war of Armageddon, part of the judgment of God. When the 6th plague is released in chapter 16, the kings of the earth go to war with the Lamb, and they lose.